Aloha, guys. Dr. Thomas back again. Now, these tapes only, this recording device I use only will record for 15 minutes at a pop. And I lost track of the time because got upset about those silly email messages coming in. So I don't know how long I'd rambled on before I realized it had stopped. So we're back on slide 27, blood-brain barrier. The brain is very heavily protected, guys, to prevent certain things from not being able to penetrate through certain drugs and stuff. That's what that is. Brainstem, we already mentioned the three parts to it, controls all the basic functioning. The spinal cord ends about L1, L2, and at that point it branches off into a bunch of little nerves, and that's called the cauda equina, which is Latin for horse's tail. Okay, we mentioned the cortex, the highest part of the brain, the thin layer of gray matter. We'll explain later what gray matter is. Now, there's fluid also that circulates through the brain and surrounds the spinal cord, and it's called Cerebrospinal Fluid, or CSF. That's real important. When they go to do an epidural, they're dealing with that fluid. Cerebrum, the big hemispheres, where all the higher functioning takes place. Voluntary muscle action, vision, speech, taste, hearing, thought, memory. Cranial nerves. Okay. In the peripheral nervous system, PNS, there are 12 pairs of highly specialized nerves. These nerves come directly out of the brain, or the brainstem, and control everything like vision, hearing are controlled by cranial nerves. Taste, smell is. The vagus nerve that we mentioned goes to all the major organs of the body. Dendrites, the little tree limbs that bring in nerve impulses into the cell body. Duromata, the thick outermost layer of the meninges. Efferent nerve. Now remember, afferent goes to the brain. Efferent goes away from the brain. Now what would go away from the brain? Motor nerve signals that go to muscles and glands. Think of motor nerves like the motor of a car. It does something. Motor nerves make muscles act and make glands secrete. They are efferent. You must know this. Go ahead and get it down right now. Ependymal cells, one of the glial cells, it helps form the CSF. It secretes it or helps control it. Ganglion, again, connections of nerve cell bodies in the PNS. They're lined up and down the spine, for example. All right, glial cells in general, supportive connective tissue cells that do not carry nerve impulses. They're the supporting structures. They're the cooks, the supply people, the mechanics, the intelligence people, the medical people. Gyrus is all the bulges and cracks and fissures on the brain have names. The bulges are called gyri. The cracks are called sulci. Hypothalamus, we talked about that, controls a lot of our basic functioning. Also controls the pituitary. Medulla, the final portion of the brainstem that ends up tapering into the spinal cord. Meninges, the three membranes around brain and spinal cord. Macroglia is another of the glial cells. Phagocytic, which means it gobbles up attacking, moves waste products. Midbrain, uppermost portion of the brainstem. Motor nerves that come from the brain, they're efferent, make muscles move. Okay, some of the axons of some nerves have a fatty white material around them called myelin. It's made of cholesterol, none of the good things that cholesterol does. Cholesterol is not the evil villain that it's been made out to be. Speeds impulse conductions. Myelinated tissue is called white matter because myelin's white. Unmyelinated fibers are called gray matter. Not all nerves require that speed. Nerve, macroscopic cord-like collection of fibers, axon and dendrites, they carry electrical impulses. Yes, but it would be more correct to say it's bundles of axons. I've never seen dendrites mentioned as being part of the nerve. It's bundles of axons. Guys, some of these cells have axons that are a foot long or more, a single cell. Because there's only like 3 cells that connect down all the way to the foot. Neuron, nerve that carries the impulses. Neurotransmitters are the chemical messages at those gaps or synapses between nerves. Oligodendroglia cell Glial cells that form the myelin sheath. Okay. Parasympathetic, we said, was the autonomic nervous system. Has two parts. Sympathetic gets you wound up. Parasympathetic brings you down. Parenchyma, essential distinguishing tissue of any organ or system. For the nervous system, neurons and nerves that carry impulses. Parenchyma is more of a classification. Peripheral nervous system, everything but the brain and spinal cord. Pia mater, the thin innermost membrane of the meninges. Plexus, interlacing network of nerves. Pons, part of the brainstem. Receptor, an organ that receives a nerve stimulus and passes on to afferent nerves, like the skin, ears, eyes, taste buds are all receptors. The largest nerve in the body, guys, is a big nerve that goes under your butt muscles, and it's called the sciatic nerve. I've treated problems in it many times. Nerve extends from the base of the spine and branches out and forms the nerves that go down into the legs. It's the size of your thumb in diameter. Sensory nerve carries messages toward the brain, so therefore they're afferent. What are some of the stuff that they carry is pain, temperature, touch, pressure, etc. Let me get rid of that stupid thing. Spinal nerves, 31 pair rising from the spinal cord. Stimulus, an agent of change, light, sound, touch, pressure, temperature, okay. Stroma, connective and supporting tissue of an organ. Glial cells are the stromal tissue of the brain. Sulcus, the cracks or grooves in the brain. Every one of them has a name. Yes, Dr. Tom at one time knew every one of them because I had to. Sympathetic nerves get you wound up. Involuntary in times of stress. Synapse, the space between the nerves where the neurotransmitters work. Thalamus, main relay center of the brain, conducts impulses to the brain and the spinal cord. Okay. Vagus nerve, 10th cranial nerve. Branches reach to the larynx, trachea, bronchi, lungs, aorta, esophagus, and stomach. Now, guys, again, in anatomy, you'll learn this in more detail. There are little cavities, or ventricles, they're called, in the brain, and they contain cerebrospinal fluid. That's what the ventricles are. Pathology. Congenital disorders at birth. Hydrocephalus, water on the brain, that's what they used to call it. It's like a baby's head sometimes, guys, can be enlarged, and they have this. Spina bifida is an exposed spinal cord. Sometimes it's just a very slight, which is of no clinical significance, and sometimes the whole darn spinal cord is outside of or portion of it, outside of the spine, which is very serious. Okay, degenerative movement seizure disorders. Alzheimer's, we know typically in elderly folks. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is called ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. Very serious, untreatable. Epilepsy, we know that, where you have seizures. Huntington's disease, multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis, the body's immune system destroys the myelin sheath and affects it. Palsy is a term for shaking or tremors, is actually what that's called. Parkinson's disease, there's a shortage of L-DOPA. There's many neurotransmitters. Tourette syndrome, it's the one where the person starts cussing and raising Cain and all, and they can't control it, supposedly. If you saw, what was it, Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, the movie years ago, there's that girl that supposedly had it. I shouldn't laugh, but it's portrayed in the media as, as being funny. Well, it kind of is funny, really. Okay, shingles, you've heard of that. It's actually herpes zoster, the chickenpox virus causes it. Infectious disorders of this. Meningitis, we mentioned that. It can be bacterial or viral. HIV, encephalopathy. I don't know a lot about that. We know HIV, is AIDS. Apparently, it has a portion of it that can affect the encephalos, the brain, which is why it's mentioned here. Traumatic disorders, concussion, you've all heard of that. Traumatic brain injury, no structural damage to the brain. Rest is the best treatment. Okay. Cerebral contusion. A contusion is like a bruise. Direct trauma to the head, bruising, subdural and epidural hematomas, bleeds can lead to permanent brain injury. Guys, we have these three meninges, and between them are spaces. And sometimes you bleed. If you start bleeding in the brain, that blood can collect in these spaces, and that's what these subdural or epidural hematomas are. It can be real serious. Okay, the leading cause of death in industrialized, westernized, scientific nations are heart attacks and strokes. And the real name for a stroke is a cerebrovascular accident, or CVA. You can call it a CVA. Everybody knows what that means. There's a couple different kinds. The most common is a blocked blood vessel from a clot or from plaquing that cuts off the blood supply to that portion of the brain. Or you can have an embolus, which is a blood clot floating through there and plugs it up. Or you can spring a leak and start bleeding. That's a hemorrhagic stroke. This makes up about 10% of them. Blood is toxic, guys, when it's outside of the vessels. So as long as it's in the arteries and veins, we're cool. But if an artery springs a leak and it starts bleeding out into that, it can destroy neural tissue. The most common, though, are these. I'd say it's a blood clot, probably, but here it shows a blood clot or an embolus plugging it up. Strokes are caused by embolytic strokes are caused by dislodged thrombi, cerebral arteries. Here's a hemorrhagic stroke where it's bleeding into the tissue. Thrombolytic strokes are caused by atheratomatous plaques that occlude the cerebral arteries. So actually, this is good that they break it down this way. So you can have a sudden stroke from a blood clot that breaks off somewhere else. An embolus, guys, is a free-floating object going through the blood. It can be a blood clot, it can be an air bubble, it can be a ball of bacteria, other things. With a thrombic stroke, is a plaquing builds up over time, and eventually it plugs up the artery. Same thing can happen in the heart and the coronary arteries. Clinical procedures. Let's see. Hopefully we're going to finish with this. Cerebral angiography. It's a certain X-ray where they put a medium in there where they can see it. CT scans of the brain, MRIs of the brain, PET scans. EEG is a common measurement of electrical activity. It's where they put the, what are they called? Little electrodes all over you. Doppler ultrasound. Ultrasound is, a lot of pregnant women have that or do an excellent job. Sheet of nerve cells produced around and fold the surface of the cerebellum. I would say it would be a gyrus, I guess. Let's see. Thin, delicate inner membrane we know is the pia mater, which term means nerve pain. Well, there's only one root word here, guys, that even comes close to what a nerve is. Of course, that's this one. And in fact, the suffix algia means pain, so the answer is neuralgia. Which type of hematoma occurs between the skull and the dura as a result of a ruptured meningeal artery, usually after fracture of the skull? Between the skull and the dura, I believe it's a subdural. These actually get a little bit confusing because there's three different membranes and there's spaces between them and all. Abbreviations. AD as Alzheimer's disease, we know what that is. FP alpha fetoprotein, I forget what that is. ALS is this very debilitating Lou Gehrig's disease. Atrial venous malformation, I don't know that warrants that, but it would have something to do with the veins. Blood-brain barrier, triple B, okay. CNS we know, CT we know, CSF we know, and CVA we know. That's a stroke. So all these are big time important. EEG, electroencephalogram. Again, it's where they put electrodes on the head and they measure electrical activity of the brain. GABA is one of the neurotransmitters. Intracranial pressure, normal pressures, 5 to 15 millimeters of mercury. I know what you're thinking. Dr. Tom, it says Hg. How can it be mercury? Because mercury was known since ancient times, and it's based on the Latin word, which I don't know what it is. Lumbar puncture. Now these things are kind of out of sync here a little bit. They often do a lumbar puncture, guys, to withdraw a little bit of cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, we're going to finish. Good. The rest of these are these terms here, and we're almost out of time. Let's see. TIA is important. It's a mini stroke. Okay, we're running out of time. Dr. Tom's going to sign off. Live it, do it, be it. We'll see you next time.